Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Well, hello once again, and welcome back to the podcast. And of course, it's Friday, so that means here on the podcast, FOMO Friday, we love to dispense of your fear of missing out because you're not listening to propaganda media anymore. And we bring you the stories of the week that you should probably at least know a little bit about. And from a series of articles from the Daily Wire comes this very first one, and I cannot emphasize just how big of a story this is. Now, it's not making a big splash in the propaganda media, but it is definitely a big story. Mark my words. For a number of reasons, it appears the more than 24 transitioner cases pending in the United States will all render favorable verdicts for those who were mutilated in the name of transgender care. Quote, I'm not in the business of making predictions, but if I had to, I would say that every one of these individuals probably has a case, and I suspect they're all going to win their judgments. Do no harm. This is senior fellow Dr. Richard Boshart, and he told the Daily Wire in a video interview on Wednesday, quote, I'll be surprised if they don't, given the way this has been carried out with very poor informed consent, he said. Medical professionals in these cases were addressing the long-term issues and not even addressing the underlying problems that so many of these children have, he explained. It's almost every single one of them has one or more major psychiatric and emotional or some other issue, many of which are not even addressed, Boshart added. He said the idea is that if they transform their sex into the opposite, that it's going to solve all of their problems. I would predict there's going to be a wave of judgments in favor of the plaintiffs in all these cases, and I think it's fantastic. I do as well. I mean, this is great. The Supreme Court has ruled that this detransitioner, this very first case, can go through and was awarded $2 million. Why? Because they were, in less than a year from the time that they decided, oh yeah, maybe I want to be a boy, they had gone through surgery in less than a year on a minor child. On a similar note, it was revealed by independent reporter Benjamin Ryan that a trans so-called expert, then the president-elect of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH, we've talked about them before, admitted during a recent New York transitioner trial that trans surgeries are not the antidote to suicide. They admitted that. Quote, then the president-elect of WPATH testified that such surgeries, in fact, are not a form of suicide prevention, full stop, Ryan said. The same admission was made last year by the American Civil Liberties Union's case Stratego in the Supreme Court when he said that there's no evidence, this is a quote, no evidence in the studies that this treatment reduces completed suicide. That's a quote. The trial of Fox Varian was the first time a verdict was rendered in a detransitioner case. And Varian, the young woman who had her healthy breast removed at the age of 16 in the name of trans care, received a $2 million judgment. Now, I want to play for you the clip from CBS News, believe it or not, talking to this reporter about this case.
In a legal first, a jury in New York awarded a 22-year-old woman $2 million in damages over her gender transition surgery that took place when she was a teenager. The plaintiff accused her psychologist and plastic surgeon of violating standard practices in their fields that led to her receiving a gender transition double mastectomy that she feels left her disfigured. Benjamin Ryan wrote about the first malpractice verdict against providers of gender affirming care for minors for the Free Press. He was the only reporter to attend the entire 3-week trial. We should note Paramount, the parent company of CBS News, owns the Free Press. For more on this, Benjamin joins us now here in Studio 57. He is an independent reporter who covers youth gender medicine, including on his Substack. So, Benjamin, let's go ahead and talk about the verdict itself. What stood out to you about the jury's reasoning here?
Well, it's hard to know exactly what they were thinking, but what they were convinced by was that the psychologist and the plastic surgeon didn't communicate well with one another. And the psychologist in particular was faulted for being sloppy and essentially being rushed in his care of this girl. It was only about 11 months between the time where she first socially transitioned at the age of 15 and a half, and she ultimately had her breasts removed at age 16 and a half.
What do you think that this verdict will mean for future lawsuits of this kind?
Well, I've certainly spoken with other litigators, other lawyers in this field, and they do feel that this will embolden others to join the field. Others have been waiting on the sidelines. So there are about 27 other similar cases that I've been able to tabulate. Some of them run into statutes of limitations where there's a short period of time after which you can file a lawsuit. But there's one coming up in Missouri in August, and also very big one, Chloe Cole, probably the most famous detransitioner. Her trial against Kaiser Permanente will be in California in April.
What was it like in the courtroom?
It was very powerful. I think in particular, we've heard a lot about this talk about suicide, about that these treatments and surgeries prevent suicide. And to hear this mother to say that she was opposed to the surgery from the start, that she was browbeaten by the psychologist, in her words, and to ultimately consenting, even though she never wanted it. And then we heard from Dr. Lauren Schechter, and he's the head of gender affirming surgery at Rush University in Chicago. And he said he's also, by the way, the president-elect of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And he said that these surgeries are not suicide prevention. So that was a very powerful moment.
And we should mention also that it is a very small number of people who do end up detransitioning, right?
The numbers are unknown. Maybe 5 to 10%, but there's not enough research for us to really be able to tell at this time.
Okay, Benjamin Ryan, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
The Americans.
Yeah, you see that right there at last little bit there where they talk about, well, there's only like 5 or 10%, that want to be detransitioned. There's no number. Why? Because let's say that you're a student who is, thinks you're the opposite sex. You go to this doctor says, yeah, let's do all this. And they start you on, whatever, puberty blockers, all kinds of, whatever the case may be. And then you change your mind. And you say, no, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to do this. You're not going to go back to the doctor and say, oh yeah, I'm going back to my original sex. You're just not going to show up, right? You're just not going to go back to that doctor who was pushing for you to do this. So those numbers aren't counted. Those only the people that go back and say, I want to detransition are counted. And that's the 5 to 10%. Well, the article goes on. It says that the comments from the WPATH leader are extremely significant since many parents have expressed feeling pressured by medical professionals to trans their child over threats of a dead daughter or son instead of a trans child of the opposite gender. In the case of the most well-known detransitioner activist Chloe Cole, for example, it seems to have been the case. Cole has said that her parents were presented by medical professionals with the insane question of, quote, would you rather have a dead daughter or a live son, unquote. Well, Cole, who started transitioning at just 13 years old, is suing Kaiser Permanente. Her case is expected to begin in April, as we heard. And another sign that the tide is turning on the transgender madness is the sudden shift from the medical establishment. This past week, both the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, the ASPS, and the American Medical Association, the AMA, pivoted from past full-throated support. The ASPS released a statement on Tuesday that said available evidence does not support genital procedures or removing the breasts of young girls who identify as boys. The ASPS also said there was insufficient support for placing kids on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. The AMA, which is the largest medical association in the nation, followed with a similar, albeit a more political statement. They said, the evidence for gender-affirming surgical intervention in minors is insufficient for us to make a definitive statement. This is what the AMA said, adding that it agrees with the ASPS that surgical interventions in minors should be generally deferred to adulthood. In the AMA's case specifically, it seems the threat of liability for trans damage to minors is apparent in the Varian verdict, and it shifted their stance. The only real hurdle for these pending detransitioner cases, it seems, would be any potential issues with statute of limitations, as Ryan highlighted. But either way, the collapse of trans care for minors seems imminent, and that is great news. Quote, it's the old dominoes falling analogy where, the first domino drops and pretty soon the entire line of dominoes is falling. That's what Dr. Bosshart told the Daily Wire. And he says, I think the whole edifice is going to collapse in due time. He also said, I think this will be seen someday as one of the darkest periods in our medical history. I think we have a couple of those type of things that have happened recently, but not everyone has gotten the memo that the tide has shifted. While other major medical organizations are backing away from their support of damaging transgender procedures for minors, the American Academy of Pediatrics, or the AAP, is doubling down on so-called trans care. Yeah. The AAP, which represents tens of thousands of professionals in pediatric medicine, said on Wednesday that its support of trans procedures for minors remains unchanged. As they said, the guidance, this is a quote, the guidance from the American Academy of Pediatrics for healthcare for young people with gender dysphoria does not include a blanket recommendation for surgery for minors. This is the AAP president, Dr. Andrew Rackine, I believe, and he said this in a statement. He said that the AAP continues to hold to the principle that patients, their families, and their physicians, not politicians, should be the ones to make decisions together about what care is best for them. AAP publications still claim that puberty blockers are reversible. Can you imagine? They still claim that the puberty blockers are reversible and cross-sex hormones are partially reversible. Gender surgeries for minors, including so-called top and bottom surgeries and facial surgeries, are still recommended for minors on a case-by-case basis. Top surgeries involved the removal of healthy breasts for young girls, and bottom surgeries are performed on the genitals or reproductive organs of both sexes. Back in June, the AAP similarly reaffirmed its commitment to trans surgeries, balking at the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to effectively that allows for states to ban trans procedures on minors. Elected Democrats, too, are generally on board with the trans procedures for minors. In October, far-left Representative AOC, for example, expressed support for so-called trans youth in reaction to a question about the GOP-backed bills banning trans surgeries for minors. And of course, candidates like Kamala Harris, Jerry Nadler, Zora Mamdani. Just a host of Democratic leaders have all backed the trans surgeries for minors. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see what happens from here. I think this is huge because I think it's the turning of the tide, and you're gonna see. Now, you're already seeing hospitals that say we're not going to do it anymore, and actually they're getting sued by liberals for saying we're not going to do those anymore. But anyway, in other news, I know at least in my area, and I know in a lot of areas, probably yours as well across the country, there have been these high school walkouts in support of ICE. And at least in my area, of course, this podcast originates from the state of Washington, up in the Pacific Northwest. And here in the state of Washington, we pay, we're charged the taxpayers ourselves are charged about $20,000 a student per year. $20,000 a student per year to educate them. And so if you do a little bit of math or whatever, and the 180 days or whatever that they have to be in class, it works out to about $111 per day per student. So we as taxpayers pay $111 per day per student. And so when you start to look at these walkouts, it starts to get pretty expensive. If you have, let's say, 100 kids, which many of these, exceed that, then you're talking about over $11,000 in wasted taxpayer money just for that walkout. Well, an opinion piece by Gregory Lakoff, and he put together a little piece of what he thought about his the generation that is doing this, is walking out of their classes, and the fact that they might not understand the whole issue. He said, when hundreds of students across the country walked out of class last week to protest ICE, the scene felt uncomfortably familiar. The chance, the certainty, and the urgency to declare a side reflected a pattern my generation repeats during nearly every political moment. Strong emotion paired with limited understanding. I like that. Strong emotion paired with limited understanding. Watching it unfold as a high school student, the issue appeared larger than a single protest. The walkouts exposed an education system that failed to teach students how the government functions or how federal law enforcement actually operates. From Georgia to California, students are walking out of class demanding that ICE be removed from their communities. In practice, for many of my peers, these walkouts function less as political statements and more as an excuse to miss class. At Lakeside High School in Georgia, where many of the protest videos originated, approximately 1,500 of the school's roughly 2,200 students participated in an organized walkout protesting ICE. Yeah, that would suggest that more than half of the student body is so politically engaged that they are willing to sacrifice instructional time for a policy cause. An assumption undermined by the fact that fewer than 40% of Americans aged 18 to 19 actually votes. For the small minority of students who genuinely care, the protests offer an opportunity to join a cause they assume is morally righteous. For all participants, however, these walkouts rest on an incomplete and often incorrect understanding of what ICE actually does and who holds authority over immigration policy. The collapse of civic education in K-12 schools has produced widespread confusion about how the federal government functions. Many students believe ICE writes immigration law rather than enforces statutes passed by Congress. Others assume the president can simply suspend laws at will, or that public outrage alone can override the legislative process and reshape federal policy. What no one has taught my peers is that Congress, not ICE, and not the White House, writes immigration law. Every administration, including President Trump's, is obligated to enforce the laws Congress passes. This confusion among students is not a failure of intelligence. It reflects an education system that avoids political controversy at all costs. Teachers are warned not to take sides. Administrators steer clear of any topic that might provoke backlash, and students grow up believing that discussing the law or governance is dangerous. Instead of learning how the government functions, students learn how to talk about it and talk around it. This silence shapes how my generation engages with politics. Only a few miles from my Long Island high school, Generation Z played a decisive role in electing a socialist mayor in America's most capitalist city. Many of those voters were never taught about the historical consequences of socialism, the collapse of economies, the erosion of democratic institutions, and the human suffering that follows. Those lessons are treated as too political for classrooms. The result is a generation making political choices without understanding the ideas being supported. Students are not avoiding dialogue because of apathy. They avoid it because schools have trained them to fear disagreement. When issues such as immigration, abortion, or Israel arise, classrooms go quiet, not from a lack of opinion, but from concern over social and academic consequences. Before becoming a nationally syndicated columnist, he says, I hesitated to speak openly in classrooms. I rewrote comments within arguments and waited for safer moments to share my views. Now I voice those perspectives in front of millions of readers, fully aware of the consequences. But even with all the pushback, my openness has not only sharpened my passion for politics, but produced an impact far greater than I ever anticipated. The danger of silence becomes clear during moments like these walkouts. When students protest without understanding what they want to change or how change occurs, it reveals how unprepared they are for civic participation. Informed activism cannot exist without civic knowledge. Restoring serious civic education remains the only path forward. Students should learn not only which policies exist, but why they exist. They should understand how Congress, the courts, and the federal agencies interact. Schools should encourage substantive debate rather than discourage it. Avoiding discomfort leaves students unprepared for the responsibilities of citizenship and for the world they are about to enter. I really liked that, and I thought it really hit on a very good point here, where these kids, yes, they're getting out of school because they can get out of school, right? But in the end, they don't understand what the issue is, and they're not taught what the issue is. They're not even taught to really even talk about it. Well, in another article I wanted to share to you, this is very good news as well. We've had a lot of good news this week. President Donald Trump announced at the 74th annual National Prayer Breakfast on Thursday morning, that the United States would be rededicated as one nation under God, as he touted his administration's defense of religious values. Trump discussed religious freedom and Christianity and announced that Americans are invited to come together on our national mall to pray, to give thanks on May 17th. Quote, we are going to do something that everyone said, that's tough. We're going to rededicate America as one nation under God, Trump said, adding, quote, I've always said you just can't have a great country if you don't have religion. You have to believe in something. You have to believe that what we're doing, there's a reason for it. Throughout his speech, the president also sprinkled in some criticism for his political opponents. Shocker, right? Specifically calling out former President Joe Biden, saying that he's the worst president we've ever had, and former President Barack Obama, a terrible divider of the country. Quote, he was a divider, and believe it or not, we're bringing the country together. You know what's bringing it together? Tremendous success. We're having tremendous success, Trump said. I don't know how a person, this is another quote, he said, I don't know how a person of faith can vote for a Democrat. I really don't. And I know we have some here today, and I don't know why they're here. They certainly don't give us their vote. And he said, on that momentous day in 1776, history changed forever when our founders proclaimed the immortal truths that echoed around the world and down all the way through time. They declared that all of us are made free and equal by the hand of our Creator. A lot of presidents refuse to say that, Trump said. Some major politicians refuse to say the word God. They don't want to say it. I say it. And he added, "We are endowed with our sacred rights to life and liberty, not by government, but by God Almighty himself." Those are good words, I thought, right? And throughout his second term, Trump has focused on addressing anti-Christian biases in the United States, as well as the persecution of Christians in Africa and the Middle East. Last February, Trump established a task force to look into attacks on Christians, condemning the Biden administration for targeting peaceful Christians while ignoring violent anti-Christian offenses. Quote, "My administration will not tolerate anti-Christian weaponization of government or unlawful conduct targeting Christians." And he stated in his order on February 6th of 2025. In the past year, Trump has also called out attacks on Christians in foreign countries, such as Nigeria. The president designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern in October, saying that Christianity is facing an existential threat. During his speech on Thursday, the president spent a considerable amount of time talking about how he targeted ICE terrorists in the Middle East during his first term, and then slammed the Biden administration's failure to keep the region stable after he left office. And of course, President Trump is also he also is the one that sent the strikes on ISIS in Nigeria. He ordered and had them carried out, and where thousands of Christians were being targeted and killed in that country until those strikes happened. So really, very good news, very good things coming out of the White House. Well, what's also interesting is that the Supreme Court decided not to take up a challenge to California's plan to draw 5 Democratic favored seats for its congressional maps this November, and until 2030, when new census data is released. So the gerrymandering effort was done as a political counter to Texas, adding 5 Republican favored seats to its congressional maps, which the Supreme Court also said could move forward. And what's happening here? Let me summarize here by saying that what is happening here is that the gerrymandering is where you basically, instead of taking an area, so you let's say you're registered to vote in a certain area, and that area has to try to be it was supposed to be as neutral as possible. So you just say, okay, I'm going to go from this area goes from this road to this road, whatever, and then whoever wins in that area is who's elected. Well, what you're seeing with gerrymandering is that it's not necessarily a square or a circle or whatever. These boundaries look, they look terrible. I mean, they literally, in some cases, will be on either side of a street so that they can incorporate another area. And what they're doing is they're trying to on racial data, they're trying to say, hey, we need to have so many blacks in this one, and we need to have so many whites in this one. And they're trying to gerrymander. They're trying to come up with votes based off of how they draw the boundaries. And they're drawing the boundaries based off of race. And that you can't do. That is racist. That is racism. That is basically like the definition of it. And you can't do that. But the Supreme Court said you can. So they're going to move forward with this. We'll see what happens from there. Well, let's end on we've had a good week of good news, and of course the Super Bowl is coming up, and so I thought this was appropriate. And this came from Ben Hooper from the UPI. He says a football superfan proved his love of the game by attending games at all 30 NFL stadiums in 72 days, and attended a total of 56 games in a single season. California man Brian Fowler broke the Guinness Book of World Record title for the most NFL games attended in a single season with 56, as well as the record for the fastest time to visit all NFL stadiums, 72 days, 20 hours, and 56 minutes. Now, Fowler said that he started attending NFL games in person after his mother, a fellow football lover, died from breast cancer in 2021. He said, quote, "I had a hole in my heart and was seeking to fill it, or at least to distract from it, he said. And so I started traveling to Raider games. I'm sorry, both in Las Vegas and away games around the country. And he said, coming out of 2024 season, which was a bad one for the Raiders, I had my sights set on chasing a Guinness World Record title, something I had read about 2 years prior, he said. The idea had been ruminating in the back of my brain, and I decided it was finally time to take the plunge. So yeah, that's kind of interesting, huh? I mean, in 72 days, he visited everywhere, and some places a couple times because he wanted to have a home game for teams that share stadiums and things. So yeah, that would have been a fun experience. Now, with the game on Sunday coming up, remember to tune in to the Turning Point USA's halftime show instead of Bad Bunnies, right? And so I would love to hear what you have to say on it or what your predictions are on it, on the game. Hey, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Thank you very much for listening, and go Seahawks. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.